you don't want to give something a name if you're not sure what it is, because you could be inviting in anything.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Are You There, Ghost? I'm Chiwan Choi. I'm your host, and I'm so excited today to have an amazing poet, amazing human, and although I haven't seen the work, amazing art historian, Jessica Lanay. I met her in Pittsburgh, but she is now in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah.
So a little bit about her. She's the 2020 winner of the Naomi Madgett Poetry Prize for her debut book, Amphibian, which is stunning. I've already told a whole bunch of people to buy the book, read it, and just last night they were telling me how stunning it was.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and it's available on Amazon, and it's published by Wayne State University Press. Is that right?
University Press is the distributor. Broadside
Lotus Press.
Yeah, they're based out of Detroit. Yeah.
Yeah. In addition to all the things I mentioned, she's a librettist. And all you uncultured people who don't know what a librettist is, she is like writing the text for an opera, a libretto. And what's the opera called that's supposed to debut?
So it's supposed to debut in November with the Pittsburgh Festival Opera. Of course, COVID, when it comes to theatrical performances or, instrumentalists being in a room blowing air through horns, a lot of stuff's up in the air. Yeah. So they're trying to orchestrate something digital for November as far as a premiere for Virgula Divina, which is the debut opera of me and my composer, Karen Brown.
So look out for that. We'll have info for her socials at the end of this episode, and you could keep track of that. So please welcome Jessica Lanay, who I love so dearly.
Yay, I love you too, Chiwan.
How are you? How was your move?
I am exhausted. I have been taking naps, and that never fucking happens. I never take naps. I just actually took one not too long ago. But, I was amazed at my friends taking my furniture down 3 flights of stairs. And then when I got to Bloomington, I did my penance for that by being me and just my best friend taking a queen-size bed, 2 dressers, 2 couches, one of which is a sofa bed, all up 1 flight of stairs. So we're in here, we're locked, we've been resting. The move happened, and now all there is to do is just manage moving forward.
And you're in Bloomington for?
A PhD in art history. So
at the University of?
It's Indiana University, Bloomington. So I have my Bachelor of Art and Art History from Agnes Scott College, but have a crazy life, and so got 2 master's degrees for some odd reason, and then finally landed in a PhD program after not going to PhD programs almost 7 years ago that I got accepted to. It's been crazy, but it's been worth it. I'm doing it now. I'm doing the thing.
You're such a fucking nerd.
I am a fucking nerd. It's insane. I think because I'm kind of candid, or always let's get a drink, or let's smoke, let's do something. People are like, oh, Jessie must be very wild. And I'm like, no, actually, if you give me a book about something that I love, I will ignore you until it's done. So
there you go. And how is Bloomington so far?
My next door neighbor, who's a bartender named Cody, kind of appeared in the doorway and was like, I just wanted to welcome you, and gave, it's not like that.
Okay.
He may not be real. Maybe he's kind of quiet over there. Maybe I just imagined it. My best friend saw him too, but my best friend also is prone. Is touched. And so maybe he wasn't there because I haven't seen him since.
Look. First thing I do when I move into a new city is get friendly with the bartenders, because that's super important. That's
Right.
super important. They'll take care of you in many
But
ways.
he
I
came
don't
home.
know. Yeah.
I think what I'm seeing in Bloomington is lots of homelessness.
Mm,
I'm seeing that kind of classic riff between people who have come here to like avail themselves of the opportunity at the university, and then people who are from here because of their proximity to the university probably in some ways never thought about the opportunities there, or to go to IU is like, it's right up the street. And so there's this stark separation, it's like people who are here just to be here until it's time to go, who, I'm not going to say living well, because the university does underfund their students and does not take care of their students. And IU is the only Big Ten university that charges their graduate students fees, which is terrible. And, there are a lot of other kind of fiscal problems with the university too, most
yeah.
universities. But, if you look at it cosmetically, the people who are funded by the university aren't sleeping in Seminary Square, right?
Right.
And maybe just barely, but the university is kind of the river between these two countries of possibly from here or migrated here from someplace else for some kind of opportunity because it's smaller and seems safer, and those people who came here with what we call in America, quote unquote, opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being a guest, even though you're tired and such, taking naps and all.
No, I'm honored. I was really excited when you asked me.
I've actually never talked to someone who is in Indiana.
The metaphysics of it is really weird because it's like, have you seen The Loop on Amazon? So The Loop on
I haven't watched it yet. It's
great. And so it's about this very kind of, it's not shady, but secreted. It's this very secreted, big kind of nuclear plant where everybody works, where they're really kind of working on time, space stuff. And so the people who live there end up being casualties to the experiments, and they end up having all these crazy interactions. There's this one episode where these two people who are interested in each other are able to stop time. And it's only because they're able to stop time via accidentally getting some old piece of machinery from her dad's garage, because he works at the Loop, that they're able to have a romantic interlude together. And then after it's over, they go back to their separate lives that would not have crossed if they weren't able to stop time. And so it's just amazing. And I feel that feeling here in Indiana. There's so much extremis in ways that people live, and the time zone, Bloomington is still Eastern Standard Time. But if I drive 45 minutes to the west, it's a different time zone. And so I feel like there's this kind of unstable kind of, I guess, meridian and energy that's kind of around. And it's kind of it's a little spooky. It's a little spooky.
What movie did we watch the other day before you left town?
We watched The Grudge. It was kind of like a remake where, of course, they have the white lady doing real estate in Tokyo, and then
that's right. Oh yeah.
Over, and
it was terrible. It was
terrible, but it's interesting. Whenever I watch The Grudge or any iteration of The Grudge or any spinoff of that, I'm always thinking about the architecture. I talked to you about this. It's I took a horror film class, and we were watching the original Ju-on, and I was there's something about the fact that these things are happening in Western style houses. Because you remember in traditional houses, especially in Japan, you have this step. And the step is supposed to keep spirits or energies from kind of passing out of the house into the world. But in Western architecture, we don't have that step. And so it seems like an advent of colonial control, Western colonial control of Eastern Asia, that this architecture now allows this phenomena of the grudge to pass and enter different points of the world via people's lives, because there's no one's thinking about technically the spiritual in a way about managing its movement, right? Usually think about architecture and spirituality, Notre Dame or Notre Dame or Saint Chapelle, they're both these vaulted Gothic architectures that are supposed to draw in light and make room for spirit and to invite it in. And the act of that kind of signals an outward assumption that there may not be much of it. And so you have to do something to draw it in. Whereas in other cultures, it's very different. Like spirit and ghosts and ancestors and angels or guardians or whatever people talk about is always just kind of like present and moving of its own accord. And there becomes a point in which you have to like sincerely interact rather than just draw it in because you assume that there's a dearth of it. Like it's a different mindset. There's not a dearth of it. It's everywhere. So that's what's interesting about all of those like interrelated movies. It's also interesting to me how what Tokyo horror like it has done to American cinema. Like the advent of like the time jumps and the time switches that isn't necessarily a flashback and different time spaces meeting. Which is pervasive in like Filipino horror, Thai horror, Japanese horror, all the horror. It's like the way that it's kind of given us more interesting horror content in our own culture, but it's so quiet. It's quiet until you actually read the credits and you're like, oh, that person was an editor here and here and there. Like The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix has that structure, that Tokyo horror structure, and it just makes the show better. Like how boring would that show be if it just went like straight through?
Right. I mean, talking about this sort of like reinforces why I asked you to be on this show, other than I love you and I want to talk to you about anything. But you're just like your background. You're like all the different cultures you bring into your life, right? Where you lived, your family history, and all that stuff. Like because we all have different sort of ghost stories or ideas of what a ghost is. Like, I mean, growing up in Korea, there was this whole story about, like, because we had outhouses, right? When I was little, about this weird egg that comes through the toilet in the outhouse. It's like, I'm never taking a shit ever. So,
like the spiritual leads to physiological constipation.
Yeah. So, yeah. I wanted to hear like either a personal story that you've experienced or stories that have been passed down to you by family and such. So if you could share that with us.
Sure. It was actually something that I did. It's something recently that happened. So when I was moving out of my apartment in Pittsburgh, I started noticing that the doors, my bathroom door specifically, kept opening more than my bedroom door because I was sleeping on the couch in the living room because it's hot. I was 3 stories up and my air conditioner wasn't working for shit. So I'm immediately assuming there's like the front door and then the hallway, bathroom door here, bedroom door there. So I'm assuming there's some kind of wind vacuum that's pulling the doors open and closed. But it was the first time in a year that had actually happened. And I moved in during the summer and didn't see that happen. And so I kept seeing the doors kind of pop open. And then I became very like purposeful. So I just sat on the couch one night with like all the lights off, but like one tiny like lamp turned on. So I actually had visibility. And I watched the handle to my bathroom door turn a few times, and then the door just kind of opened up just enough, and then all of a sudden the door closed, and it just closed like pop, and I was like, okay, there it is. And then I looked to the bedroom door and I watched for like 2 hours. And sometimes I think of poltergeist just because of, my own relationship with my mental health, severe depression. And I think about that sometimes. It's not really in the repertoire of my culture to use that terminology as being like from the global South. So my family is African American, from the American South, West Indian, and Black Cuban on my mother's side. And so the same thing happened with the bedroom door. Like the handle turned and then the door kind of popped open, but it didn't pop open. It just popped open enough for a tiny body. And so something in my heart or in my head was like, oh, that's my son, you know, because at once I was pregnant and far enough along to know the sex of the child. And so Sebastian was his name, but I'm an insulin dependent diabetic. And at that time I didn't have access to insulin. And so the doctor was basically like, you're going to get sick. This is bad. Like, it's not like you're insulin dependent because you're pregnant. Like, the condition is you have no pancreas and you're trying to carry like a child. And so I ended up not being able to like have my son in the world with me. But my mom was always like, oh, well, you know, like where we come from, something that comes out of the water and stays in the water remains in the water. So it's like this continuous myth of like, I'm always pregnant. Like the spirit is inside of me. It's always there in me. It manifests at the age that it is, and it moves through the places where I am and follows me because I am his mother. And so I didn't want to say anything specific or call it out because I was always taught like, you don't want to give something a name if you're not sure what it is, because you could be inviting in anything. And you know, oftentimes, as we see in lots of horror movies, like when demons introduce themselves, I'm not saying that that's what it is at all. I still very much in my heart think that it's Sebastian, but like, it's like demons model children in order to manipulate people into inviting them in and giving them care to manipulate children around them. And so like when I moved out and the apartment was empty, I went from room to room and I just started clapping really loudly. And I was like, okay, it's time to go, you guys, get it together. Let's go. You can't stay. The next people here are not going to understand. If you're coming with me, come with me. If you're staying, you can stay, but you can't stay here. You got to go. And I went from room to room to do that. And it was something I was taught to do. You have to kind of scare out or clap out what follows you, because everyone has something that follows them.
Right.
And so when I got here, you know, like I haven't done like an invitation yet, but I haven't done the invitation specifically because my best friend is spending the first week with me here. And so but once he's gone, like I will do an invitational to have those things those entities that have been positive for me kind of come up, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a really recent story of something.
So, I mean, when this whole idea of like what's in the water stays in the water, was it passed down to you as something to be afraid of or something to just accept or relish or?
So there were a lot of ways that I think I was kind of shielded in ways that other people were not. There was never like a super explicit conversation about spirituality in my family, but it was basically just watching and receiving commentary. So the act of, I guess, me being treated like a ghost, like me being born so pale in colors, comparison to my mom's family who are all like milk chocolate, dark skinned, you know, plum colored people. And, you know, me also being born sick. So I was born without a pancreas. And so, you know, my mother's family, my great grandmother, who I had until I was 18, was very, very open with me when I had a question, but was always like, you can't go to Regla Ocha, which is also known as Santeria for, you know, people who are like, I looked it up online, but in the community, we call it Regla Ocha, or the rule of the head. And, you know, like you can't undergo possession because you're not going to come back. You can't participate, but you can help prepare because, you know, like you're already halfway not here. And so kind of growing up with West Indian religion and being protected, like from the time I was small, I used to have a necklace that had what we call an evil eye, a devil's claw, and black beads, and also a figa, which is this right here, a figa on the necklace, in order to protect me and kind of keep me grounded. Like it was supposed to keep me grounded because I was sick. And
Yeah.
my family understood it to be like, oh, she has to go to the hospital. I went to all the doctors, was very well taken care of. But they also saw it as a spiritual battle as well. It was never just like, oh, she's sick. It was, there's something in the DNA of ancestry, beyond blood, beyond bone. There's something in the DNA of ancestry and who you come from that has made you tenuously attached here. There's a way in which you are kind of half ghost. And so, and I think that that was racial too, because my father is white. And so I think that that was also a way of them kind of reading the sociocultural norm, especially in the South around white bodies, as like, those, like, them not people. Like, they don't treat us like people the way we treat them like people, so they must not be people, you know, kind of ethic. And not really in a sense of people like human beings, but in behavior. Like, and so I think it's this melange of things. It stands in for symbolism, even though I firmly believe and stick by its own spiritual impact and essence. Like, it is a thing.
It's always interesting to me being here in the US, like sort of how, and this comes through like watching a lot of horror movies from different countries and stuff, and remembering the stories that were told to me as a kid in Korea and in Paraguay. Right?
No, yo
Like,
quería
yeah,
preguntarte, like, did your
yeah,
spirituality change cuando la familia llegaron
yeah,
en Paraguay? Like, how did it change?
yeah, and like this sort of the perspective of it is different in every culture, right? And how, and you think about all the deaths, all the colonization, all the wars, all the battles, and everything, and you go, oh, wow, how much of this feeds into how we perceive the spiritual, the ghost, the supernatural, paranormal, all that stuff to be. It's fascinating. Like, this idea that you're born physically with deficiencies, and they start putting it into this thing of like, this and this and this must be responsible, therefore you must do this and this and this.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like a holistic thing too. Like, I think I learned something very specific about how to take care of my body based on my feeling. Because I think people just take care of their body based on their physical feeling a lot, like that Cartesian, like, mind, body thing. But if I feel something emotionally, or if I feel anxious, I'm like, okay, this is what I can physically do. It's never just like, oh, well, my elbow doesn't hurt, so I'm not going to do anything about the fact that, you know, whatever. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it. It's like, well, maybe there is. It's like, maybe you should just sit down and relax.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, like, I would tell my parents, oh, I had a dream about this, this, and this. And then they would go, you shouldn't go outside today, and make sure you do this and this and this, or else you're going to get murdered or something.
Well, one time, when I was still living in New York, I had a dream. And I was asleep, but I was awake. You know what I mean? Like, you go to sleep, but then you wake up in this dream and you're like, oh, this is really kind of real. Am I awake? And I heard the door open, the front door open. It was a studio apartment. So I was probably like, I don't know, 20 feet from it. And I saw this woman with like long dark hair and this kind of like high collared, kind of like old dress. Like, I don't know, I would say it was a prairie dress. I couldn't really see it. I just knew it was a dress and it was high collared. And she walked to the foot of the bed and she stood in profile. And I wasn't scared, but I was just like, what do you do? I was like, literally in the dream, I was like, what are you doing here? And then she turned towards me and she had no face. And then she put her finger over her mouth, like, be quiet. And then she literally just walked away and dissipated through the windows. And with the situation that I was in, I like called my mom the next day and I was like, Mommy, I had this dream and this is what happened and blah, blah, blah. And my mom was like, you need to find some coral beads and wear them around your neck or around your hips. And you also need to leave that partner that you're with. And I was like, at the time I was like, no, everything's great. And she was like, no. And it turned out definitely
not great. Definitely
the thing I should have like exited. Like it was definitely a thing. Like, I'll never forget that dream ever.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, speaking of Pittsburgh and like what we should have done, you know, the first apartment my wife like rented here when she started her PhD, um, I was still in LA mostly. And she would tell me she kept feeling this presence in the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And then one night she was like, while she was in bed, she said she felt the person like grab her hand and try to pull her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, he actually told me his name.
Oh, what was his name?
So
No.
I can't remember right now, but like we looked up the last name to see what the history of that last name in Pittsburgh was.
Oh my
There
God.
wasn't much except there was African migrants that landed in Pittsburgh with that last name,
Right.
right? One day I'm coming home and I realize, holy shit, this crosswalk in the street in front of us that leads downhill into the park leads directly into our front door. And I was like, this is seriously like a passage,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right? And it's like this country has such a history. I was just saying the other day, it's cracks me up that all the haunted house movies in the US are like sort of like nondescript or white ghosts
Right.
when
Right.
it
I mean,
should just be every ghost other than.
I think that there's a way that like the American horror story, the real American
Yeah.
horror story, is not the story of secure suburbia being uprooted, is not the story of, you know, collective American spirituality being like hijacked and like harmful to other people. The collective American horror story is that the way that this place came into existence was through the massive orchestrated waste and death of people who are first, you know, like First Nation or Native American,
Yeah.
enslaved West Africans or people who would have considered themselves Black after being seasoned or spending time in the Caribbean or even on the African coast,
Yeah.
West African coast. Like there is a massive kind of layer of blood, like in the ground everywhere that we go, because the comforts that we have right now still rely in a great deal on death. And the fact that we do so much to push it down and tamp it down with like our media, our food, our access to creature comforts and stuff like that, like it just means that it's screaming at one point. And especially in like towns like Pittsburgh, like I lived in the Hill when I first moved there, and and I did an oral history project, and it was amazing to me how these, you know, elder women who were mostly over the age of 75 spent their youth in the Hill, moved away, came back when they were later adults and their children were grown, how they could point out where cemeteries used to be. Like that house was built and sitting on a cemetery. That empty lot is a cemetery. Yeah, and like thinking about like the way that like the American horror story and every horror film that takes place in the United States, right, for me is just about white anxiety about all of this like bodies that have been stepped on to reach creature comfort. And now to a certain extent, if you're thinking about a white supremacist structure and a haunting, anyone who's complicit in white supremacy is running the risk of a haunting. And I think that there are ways that like, you know, and I don't want to say this without mentioning that it's like it's inappropriate, even though I'm getting ready to do it, to relate anxiety, clinical anxiety, with haunting. But there's a way that a different kind of anxiety that is not clinical can be the product of a haunting. And it's that feeling your wife had, that Judy had,
Yeah.
where it's like there's something here, it's moving all around me, and it might not know yet the physics of its existence. It
Yeah.
hasn't accepted it yet, and so it's just trying to
Yeah.
like, it's trying to make, it's like, the question is, am I still here, right? Like most
Yeah.
human disruption, physical or spiritual, is about whether or not you still exist.
How has your experience and both experiencing it and being told the stories by ancestors and generation affected your work, if at all?
It affects my work a great deal because I think that I spend more time with my dead than with my living family. And I mean it on multiple levels. I mean it on the level that I'm always thinking about my family history, especially on my mother's side. I'm always thinking about how I literally come from a long line of women who at one point were just like, fuck it. And they just left. They grabbed their children, they grabbed their shit, they put it on a wagon, and they were like, fuck this, I'm leaving. And then they just appeared in these other places. Like one time somebody was describing my great-great-grandmother Lavinia to me, and they were like, no, she just up out the swamp. Like she just walked out of the swamp with all these children, and then she was there, and it was like she was always there. I think about it on a level of like happenings that happen like around me, like when I'm alone and something kind of scoots itself off the counter, and I'm like, I'll go, why don't you ever do this when someone's here? And it's like, it's not for them, it's for you. Like it's about communicating with you in some kind of way, or having experiences with other people. I always take it with a grain of salt, right? Because there's a family history here where I'm like, I don't want to get into like a situation where I'm a Black woman who ends up being institutionalized, which happens all the time,
Right.
with or without any evidence of whatever. It just happens. And so like one time when I was still living in Wisconsin, my roommate had a friend. And the friend was like, yeah, you know, like she was white. I think she's like Irish American. And she's talking about like her own family's history with like pagan and like Wicca and like her own connection to it, and how her grandma always kept this kind of garden and how she learned. And I was very much like intrigued by what she was saying, because my great grandmother also had a garden where we pulled things out of the ground and put things in the ground. And so I used to have this pair of earrings. I only have one left because I lost the other one in a bar fight because I had to fuck somebody up. But I had this pair of earrings, and so I had asked her to pass them to me. So I said, hey, could you pass me those earrings? And so she grabbed the earrings, and then as soon as she picked them up, she dropped them, and she started to like hold herself. And I was like, and then she looked up at me, and her eyes were so red, like, because she was really pale. So she was just red. And she was like, oh my God. And I was like, what is wrong? Are you okay? Like, I thought she was having a heart attack. And she was like, the amount of stuff that you have been through in your life are in those earrings. And I only saw like partial flashes of it. And you are surrounded by people, and they are not fucking around. And then years later in New York, another friend of mine, Blue June, who has a podcast of her own about being a witch and like doing like multicultural research and exploration via primary source interview, like we're doing about witching. She also, like, when she met me, the first time I came into like her little booth, she like backed into the corner and she was like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to ask for a lot of permission before I read for you, because there are people, there are spirits around you who are refusing. They don't trust me. They don't. And so there have been other people from different practices totally, who've been like, I need to do some extra stuff. Not because the people around you are bad, but because they're so defensive. They're so defensive of you and who's around you, and being able to step into like your spiritual stuff. And so it's like, yeah, like, you know, it just happens. And I think that I try to toe the line. I try to acknowledge what I've seen for what it is, and then take into account that it could have been the wind.
It's never the wind.
It's never the wind. It's never the wind. Yeah. There's nothing like a healthy, like a little sprinkle of gaslighting for your ego.
Yeah. You actually have a great line in your book about like, not in your book, in the interview I did with you earlier, about like, it's nice to have the dead with you, but you just don't want them to be the only
thing you have with you.
Yeah.
And I think in my poetry, like, I know lots of poets say this, but it's listening.
Yeah.
It's listening. It's like, how is it? It's like if there's a room full of people praying all at once and they're all praying for different things, and you go up to the thick doors and you lean your head against the door and you're listening and you can only get pieces of what every different person is praying for or asking for, that's what it sounds like when I'm getting ready to write. Like it sounds like I'm putting my ear against the door and kind of taking whatever I can get and then folding myself into it as I extend what I've heard into something that's crystallizing a happening or an experience.
On that note, can you read something for us?
Yes, I'll read.
Show us that book.
Oh, this is Amphibian. I guess it's officially also outing me as like a visual artist because I did this collage work myself by hand and then I scanned it. So got
it's an amazing book. It's an absolutely amazing book.
Thank you. I got everything I wanted by being a huge bitch. It's fine. So the first poem I'm gonna read is Topo, and it's because it has something to do with that statement I make about like it's nice to have your dead around, but not only.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
1. The land's clock is the water, everything bright flame, losing oxygen, losing, growing from face high to the orange tongues of green beasts, to tall enough to drive the trolleys, never having to learn the names of your lanes, the sea ululating hunger, a white noise. 2. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. 2. When the roots cannot suck through the stone, they go up. They speak double. Up, up. High, high. Wooden tarantulas. They've known the island since the ocean was teething. Equivalency. Which island disappeared so where I was born could be born? Hi, Brazil. Maybe. 3. There are more dead here than people. You learn to prefer it so. The poinciana blushes to blood, giving red shade, wind chimes of sun. This heat is unbearable. Leaving seawater on our graves is unbearable. A man in white walks from between the stacked graves, and no one else sees him. No one else sees anything. We could not see the eclipse from the island, and in this way, we are outside, outside. What rules does your death have? 4. Iguanas burst open. A run over orange, heart askew, limbs, a new gesture, a stamp on the hot road. They may belong to Uncle Buka, who raises them, sets them free. They aren't pets, he insists. Pets you keep from dying. A person can be an absent god of just about anything. 5. I was weighed here, so to speak. First broke my head on the elephantine limb of this Seba. Weighed, a heart, in the duat. You must pass through trials only to end up looking at a feathered god on an island in eternity. If you are too heavy, you are cast into oblivion. Your soul gathers filth. Clothes gather filth. One can be washed, one can't. Weighed, a fruit, a feather. Did you come here looking for biography? Did you come looking for release? I have none for you. I don't come from anyone that maps such things.
Damn.
So that's Topo. And the other one I'll read is, I think it's one of the abreaction poems, because it talks about being a self-haunting. And it's like being your own ghost, kind of like in your own veins.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I hope
that idea is like so relevant when
right.
you have multicultural or you're immigrant. You're just like, I am a ghost of myself. Like it's a weird feeling.
Right. It's like filling up your own head. It's like
Yeah.
you have to shed so many things and so many selves in like your sojourn from place to place and people to people and language to language. Like I think
Yeah.
that and this is does or doesn't make it into the like podcast, that's fine. But I remember when I met you and you told me about your family moving all the way to South America to Paraguay. And then like I was like, do hablo español? And you're like, sí, hablo español. And I was like, yes! Like all of a sudden I felt like this kinship, because it's like having to learn different ways or carry different ways of communicating in your own family. Or I know people who are blood related that can't understand each other.
Yeah.
and they don't know. Okay, am I gonna do I'll do bereft.
Okay.
All right. Bereft. I hear the sound, air pulsing the eardrum when the room is empty. A wetted finger around the lip of a crystal glass. I cannot tell if it comes from me, like the bellow from a shofar, taking shape in the air, turning into a thing. Like the second E in bereft, the eh sound of a mouth open in hunger. Hear it there in the word, the R, the sour river in the stomach when you haven't had enough. Reft comes from the Old English for ruffian, which means to rob, to plunder. But also the word ruffian is a bitter leaf on this branch. The culprit and the victim living in the word eh, the sound of hunger. People can be holes, my friend. You can drive into them like lakes and never be seen or found again. Bobbing to the bottom, a breath, a hollow chamber of air racing to the top until it pops.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being with me on this. For talking.
I hope that you become greater than Aaron Mankey.
I don't know who the fuck that is, but
He does that lore podcast.
Who? Oh, the lore.
Yeah.
Turn that into a show. Before we go, can you tell people where they can find you on social media and such?
Yes. If you're looking for lighter posts, but with a more acerbic twist, you can find me on Twitter. And that's at Frida, Freedia Kahlo, Kahlo. And it is a mashup of like Big Frida, how she spells her first name, and Frida Kahlo's last name. If you're looking for something more consistent and maybe a little bit more like lighthearted and disorganized, you can go to Instagram, and it's at Hosecco. So it's HeauxSecco, like Prosecco, but with a fancy ho instead of the pro. And if you want to find me on Facebook, which is just basically me just posting what's coming up next, then you can just find me at Jessica Lanay, L-A-N as in Nancy, A-Y. And things that are happening really, really soon are our Bomb Magazine interview is coming out in September, so I'll be posting that really soon.
Yeah.
And also, I am going to be on a program that's between Cave Canem and the Bowery, and it's for people who have just published first books. And so It's not confirmed who I'll be speaking with yet, but that's going to happen September 21st on Monday at 7. And so you'll see who I end up, because it's supposed to be like me, a debut published poet, with someone who's more experienced than us talking, who has more publications than us talking about our first books together after we read. So it should be great. And I hope to see many people there, especially you.
Yeah, I'll be there. You know that. Yes. Thank you so much, Jessica, and be safe in Indiana.
Thank you, Rob.
Indiana, right? Yeah.
Indiana.
And
the Loop. I'm in the Loop.
Yeah, and we'll be talking again soon.
Yep. Much love to you.
Mwah.